Hi, welcome to Sabre Limited Expert Series. Today we're going to talk about Great Plains versus Business Central manufacturing. So let's get into it. Today, Business Central manufacturing versus Great Plains manufacturing is going to be the focus of our presentation. So let me get into it. My name is Rob Jolliffe. I'm president of Sabre Limited. I'm an expert in manufacturing and supply chain and IT, ERP in general. There's a couple of assumptions if you're watching this video. You are probably a manufacturing company. And normally I would say you're a mid-market manufacturer looking for a mid-market ERP, but I would assume that you're a GP manufacturer looking to see whether Great Plains can be upgraded to Business Central and that's the right path to take. So, if you'd like to talk to me, if you have any questions about this, down below in the description, we're going to put a link to my calendar through Calendly, and you can go in, you can book a meeting. This is no obligation. We don't charge for this, but I do really encourage people to just use 30 minutes of my time and bug me and ask any questions you have. I've done this particular presentation a couple of times at different conferences, user conferences, and I found it's pretty useful for clients. So I've decided to reproduce it here today, given the recent news. Just as a bit of background, Sabre began as a GP partner. Our journey in Dynamics began in 2008 when we became a GP partner. But by 2013, we were finding that there was a challenge selling it in my geography. NAV tended to be more popular, and we were losing a lot of deals to other partners who sold NAV. So we decided to switch. And from 2013 to 2015, we migrated or transitioned our practice from a GP practice to an NAV practice. And frankly, haven't sold GP since around that 2015 timeline. So we're a little out of date in it, but I'm going to brush off my my dusty knowledge of GP manufacturing, which, to be honest, I did do some research about 2 years ago, and it has not changed in any significant way. The other thing I'm going to say, most of you know by now that Microsoft has announced that 2029 is going to be the end of GP as a product. Now, I don't really think that's necessarily means that by 2029 every GP customer is going to be off GP. I have clients who are running software that was designed in the early 1990s to run on a green screen mini computer system, AS400 or a System 36, IBM System 36, and they're still running it. So we're going to see GP out there in the market for many, many years to come, 10, 20 years to come. We'll still see GP. I think, though, that because of this announcement, it's going to cause customers to take a real serious look at whether they migrate off of GP to something else. And it isn't going to necessarily be Business Central. That's what Microsoft wants, but I realize that some people are going to choose some of the other products in the market. We actually have comparison articles and information on the other products, the main cloud products. So the purpose of this particular video is going to be the comparison of GP to Business Central. And what we've done is myself and my colleagues have selected a bunch of major areas of difference between GP and Business Central, or similarities, and we've kind of consolidated them into this list. We tried to explain the differences and kind of rate them, like which of the two products seems to be better. I am biased because I do like Business Central, but I tried to be really honest about the ratings that we put in here. Generally, to be honest, to just sort of summarize it, you're going to find that GP and Business Central have really similar feature sets, and there are a couple of things GP does that, frankly, Business Central could use. There are some add-on products. We'll talk a little bit about AppSource, but just in passing. AppSource is a tremendous feature of Business Central, which is something that Great Plains never matched, which is just that there are literally thousands of add-ons. Now, GP customers were used to add-ons and adding in modules into their GP system. Business Central just takes that to another level and makes it easier and much more common to do. The other thing I'm going to say is the Business Central user interface, in our opinion, is much more modern, much easier to work with. There's much less learning curve, way less clicky, a lot more information on the screen in front of you than GP. Now, you may have used GP for 25 years and have memorized keystrokes and memorized where you go on the screen, and you won't be able to take that knowledge and bring it forward. But in general, new employees are going to find it much, much easier to learn. Let's get into the comparison. This is a pretty long video, so it's going to take quite a bit of time to go through them, but I'm going to try and go through fairly quickly. Once again, if you want to bug me, please go ahead and look at the description of the video and find the link to my calendar, and then we can get into more details. Okay, general features of the two. The first one I want to talk about is customization. So GP customization is really hard, particularly in the manufacturing modules. GP customization is done in Dexterity, which is a very undocumented, poorly known development language. There's a bunch of experts in Dexterity out there, and God bless you guys. It's amazing that you learned how to program in Dexterity. But the GP manufacturing modules are not exposed to Dexterity programmers. You have to know what they are. Now, GP has lots of pre-created user fields, so when you want to create some extra customization in it, so to speak, it's pretty easy to just take some user fields and use them for what you want. You have extender, you can use extender, and you can use some of the advanced extender, like anything from E1 to sort of build even more. You have this limited VBA capability, but it has a lot of problems. So the VBA works, but like only so far. And of course, I mentioned already Dexterity and my shock. Business Central customization is easy. And just to give you an example, we went from GP to Business Central, or NAV as it was called then, and a customer asked me to quote on something, and I quoted as I would if it was in GP, and I quoted about 40 hours to complete that customization request that they had. My developers came back to me the next day and had completed a prototype in 8 hours, which was absolutely impossible in GP. There's no way they could have done that. And that prototype was pretty close to what the customer wanted. So around 10 hours of total customization time was required in the NAV product to produce what would have taken 40 hours to do in GP. And that is a fair comparison, that 1/4 the effort and time to do customization. And in addition, the amount of customization you can do is much broader. The source code of the manufacturing modules in Business Central is open. It's an open source product. You can get it in GitHub. You do not have a need for the pre-created user fields, because within Business Central, adding user fields through code is trivial. It's a 15-minute programming exercise. So you also have no need for extender or VBA, because the Business Central customization language is as easy to use as VBA, but it's embedded directly in the product. So it's not like you have that VBA layer that's kind of semi-separated from the rest of GP and can break and cause all kinds of problems. So Business Central gets my star for being significantly better from this customization point of view, which I actually think is a big drawback to GP, and it's part of the reason why I believe that we were okay to go to NAV. Now the next point is integration, which is connecting GP Business Central to other add-ons. So sometimes you had kind of a forced integration or you had to force integration with GP. You had to go through the SQL databases. You would also find that sometimes within GP, there were integrations that were done that you ended up with really different looks and feels of the integrated product. So you'd get a product added on. An example I'll use, and I don't want to call out too many examples, but Batchmaster is an example. Batchmaster was written in .NET. You could really tell that it was written in a different language. It felt like you were in a different software package. Even the standard manufacturing packages in GP often feel a little different than the rest of GP, or SOP versus POP, where they've made different decisions about how to do things. So there are elements in GP where it's just inconsistent. And then you got Integration Manager, which you could use to bring data into GP, but you couldn't use it in manufacturing. Manufacturing just wasn't supported by that. Business Central, on the other hand, everything is really well integrated within the product. So any add-ons that you get for Business Central from almost any company, it blends in and follows exactly the same pattern and design and look as everything else within Business Central. Very, very consistent user interface, and the rapid start or configuration packages within Business Central totally supports the manufacturing module. As I mentioned, all the source code is available, but so all of the modules, all of the features of Business Central integrate into manufacturing. There are very, very few features. So Business Central, manufacturing, and the add-ons and enhancements and integrations you could get for it just feel better. They're more cleanly part of the product. There's less of that feeling of, well, they did it differently here than they did there. So I think it's just a winner for sure on the technical parts of the product. Okay, now trade, which would be supply chain, purchasing, sales, inventory management. Purchasing to start, blanket orders in GP kind of handles them as a purchase blanket order. It's sort of like a PO of that's marked as a blanket type of PO, but it's basically a PO with a delivery schedule is essentially what it is. And then you receive against the blanket. So you would print the purchase order, send it to your vendor, and it would say, here's my blanket. And then your vendor would deliver against it. So it's more like a delivery schedule really than what I would call as a blanket. In Business Central, the blanket is a blanket. It acts as a forecast for delivery, but it's released against. So you would create a release as a standard purchase order, which would relieve the blanket. And this is a more traditional way of running a blanket. This is kind of how companies typically think of them, as a forecast of purchase that they're going to make, and then they're going to manage against that forecast and confirm that they've ordered everything they said. So it's going to decrement the quantity remaining, and it basically you receive those releases normally. So it's just you're releasing a regular purchase order, receive the purchase order through the normal processes, and the quantities get decremented. So if what you've done is negotiated pricing based on a minimum buy, which is typically why blankets exist, then Business Central does a much better job of managing that blanket, in my opinion. For requisitions, GP has a draft purchase order, what is essentially draft purchase order, which is a requisition module. And it allows a really clean end-to-end workflow that somebody can requisition something, the requisition goes to management, or the buyer or the management approve it, and then they process that. And then the buyer would correct anything that was wrong on that and convert it to a purchase order. Business Central has a module called the requisition worksheet, but there really is no write-in capability to do write-ins like you can do in a requisition in GP. And it's really difficult to know who entered it and to push it through some kind of workflow. The alternative is to use something called a purchase quote, which is a little bit like a requisition in GP, but again, it's not meant to be used that way, so you have to do workarounds. So I'm going to give GP the star on the requisition module within purchase orders. If you're using that, you will find that moving to Business Central, you'll have to make some adjustments. Outsource services. So GP and Business Central kind of work the same way. Most of this functions in an identical manner. The shipping the product to the outsource is a little different in GP than the way you do it in Business Central. The receiving the product back also is a little bit different, and the costs go through the outsourcing cost bucket, which is also different. Business Central is linked through routing, and you set up a work center as a vendor, and you ship your product to outsource. You receive your product back, but the costs go to a dedicated cost bucket. You don't have to define you don't have to pick one of the cost buckets that would normally be used for something else and say, this is the one I'm going to use for outsourcing. Business Central was built with outsourcing in its original initial design. I'm going to give it a tie because for practical purposes, there are a few things GP does that might be slightly better. There are a few things Business Central does, like on the financial side, that is definitely better. But overall, they essentially work the same way. Okay, so that's on the purchasing and supply chain side. On the sales order side, configurator. So GP has this out-of-the-box configurator, which is just a very simple replace option. You use a super bomb, and you basically can go and get ISV options when you need more advanced configuration capabilities. Business Central has no out-of-the-box configurator. There just isn't one. All of the configurators are ISV extensions. There's many, many choices for them, and some of them work virtually identically to how the GP configurator worked. But GP has an out-of-the-box configurator. So if you're looking at out-of-the-box feature comparisons, GP is going to win on this basis. Now, what I would say is, if you're looking at the available ISV option configurators and how cleanly they integrate, Business Central is going to win. The integrations of the out-of-the-box ISVs, the add-ons that you can go and you can buy and add into Business Central, they're much cleaner the way they work with Business Central. They're embedded directly into it. Okay, blanket orders in sales blanket orders. There's no sales blanket order in GP. You got a client, they agree to buy a certain dollar value from you, and you have to track that as a contract, and did they buy the 1 million pieces this year that they agreed to buy? There's no way. But in Business Central, it's perfectly supported within the system, acts as a forecast of sales. You enter releases as standard sales orders. You decrement the quantity. You ship the releases per normal, and you track the contract amount remaining. And so you can hold the customer to their agreed contract. So Business Central definitely gets the star on this one. There's a couple other little differences. Some of them are pretty big. The sales order processing, purchase order processing concept that's in GP, which is an additional set of modules that you add in so that you can do line-wise sales and line-wise purchasing, where you have the I forget what they're called now, but the sales invoice by itself with just a description and a total, and the purchase invoices by themselves. Those latter two don't exist in Business Central. Business Central is all SOP POP. Every invoice is a full sales. If you have a GL account on it in a total dollar, that's fine, but they all go through that way. There are no batches. When you post a sales order, it posts direct. Everything posts direct. There's no multi-tier batching. And I'm not getting into the financial differences between the two. Business Central does not have a distinct document called a back order. A back order is a sales order that has a remaining quantity on it. So, and this is much more like traditional ERP systems or other ERPs. GP was the only ERP I've ever seen that actually creates a document called a back order. So when you short ship a sales order in Business Central, it remains open. And you can change different values and track them, and there's a place where you can see them in the system. These are incomplete shipped sales orders. Business Central does not use segments and dimensions, so your site segments don't really exist. There is something called a responsibility center that duplicates that. There's one other thing that I didn't put on here. It has to do with shipping. The concept of separate fulfillment in Business Central is much stronger than the same thing in GP. It's not really pure manufacturing. It's more of a distribution function. But if you want to send releases out to your warehouse and say, hey, warehouse, this is what I want you to ship, that is a better process than GP. Okay, let's talk about manufacturing. So I'm going to talk about engineer to order and project manufacturing, which is a type of manufacturing where you have sort of dynamically built bills of material that are being finished while you may sell the product without a bill of material actually having been defined, maybe just high level long lead time items. It's really kind of a combination of a project like GP projects or bills of material like GP manufacturing orders, but it's kind of like a baby between the two. So in project management in GP, you could use project cost codes to use projects to run it, but you can't create a BOM in those. Or you could create manufacturing orders, and you can buy to the manufacturing order, but then you have to release them, and they are going to get dynamically changed as they go, and that's kind of awkward. And you're also going to have like subcontractor fees and charges that are loose that it's really hard to assign them to a BOM or to a routing link or a routing code. And you also want that estimate and actual comparison. So if you use the GP projects, you could do this, but you lose BOM and it's really hard to see a purchase list. If you use manufacturing, then it's also, you lose the project skills and capabilities. So Business Central has something. It's now called project tasks, but jobs is what it was called up until recently. Projects are very similar to GP projects, but they allow you to have a planning lines, which is a BOM. And you could cut purchase orders directly against the projects from the planning lines. So you can basically have a planned purchase list or make lists. So if you're going to manufacture some of it yourself, you could PO link those to the planning lines. You could create assemblies, which are linked to the planning lines as well, which are like kits in GP, very similar. And then you can purchase inventory time, subcontractors to the job, estimate actuals, but it's way better. Like honestly, compared to GP projects, which is a little bit of a redheaded stepchild of GP, the Business Central projects modules are just much better and designed, much more closely aligned to what a manufacturing company needs. Now, there are also some ISV solutions, and I'll just pitch Sabre here. Sabre has a specific ISV solution that really enhances this and ties it more directly into manufacturing, but also gives you BOM import capabilities and a whole bunch of extra features. So by far, if you're project manufacturing, you're going to find moving from GP project manufacturing to Business Central project manufacturing is you're just going to have a big level up. Now, if you're production, which would be manufacturing orders, GP manufacturing orders, you have SOP, MOP integration. If we're talking about sales integration, generates a manufacturing order from a sales order. You link the SO to the MO or the MO to the SO. Automated, silent, or manual, so you can have it just automatically created. Basically, Business Central is the same. You have the planning module, which allows you to link a production order to a sales order. So production order rather than manufacturing order, same concept. The MRP module is capable of really quickly and easily creating order level production order suggestions. So it's kind of your silent, but a little bit more control over it. Very similar to the way it allocates or reserves. It's a little bit less flexible linking. What you can't take an MO, a Business Central production order, and link it back to a sales order. You can, but it's not done the same way at all. It's a little bit more tricky. But I'd say basically the two products are a bit of a tie in that regard. And I think the Business Central one adds a few extra features. And let's talk about order promising, because I think this is where you get a bit of an advantage. So available to promise, which is going to check like an MRP type check. What do I have today in inventory that I could supply the customer? And it's at that sales order level, and it's only looking at the top level item. Business Central has that, and it has something called capable to promise. And capable to promise will drill into all of the components at all of the levels of the bill of material structure of that finished good, and it'll use the MRP rules, and it'll take lead times and availability, and it'll suggest an earliest date that you can promise that particular item to that customer, and it's pretty accurate. If you turn capacity constrained resources on, I believe it will take those into account as well. So it'll do a kind of finite scheduling for you to try and analyze, like, when can I actually get this thing made and shipped to that customer based on the lead times of raw materials. If I am out of a raw material at any level of my bill of material structure, I'm out of a component, it'll look down, it'll figure out what that longest lead time is, and it'll propose that as your sales lead time. This is very good for companies that have that kind of bill of material structure that's well defined, and their MRP is correctly set up. The bills of material per item in GP, and you have your eng, your archive, and your manufacturing BOM. You have the ability to mass add, remove, update. You have regular and phantom parts. You have effectivity dates on them. Basically, Business Central, the bills of material are independent of the item. They stand apart. So you have 3 items. They're all made with exactly the same materials, but one's blue, one's red, one's green. But you decide you're not gonna consider the color in it, and all 3 of those items have the same bill of material. You can use Excel to mass change the BOM in much the same way as the mass add remove. You can attach a BOM to an item. You can have multiple BOMs. There's just really one type of BOM, but you can save them, you can archive them, if you will, and have as many versions of them as you want. Some of them can be inactive, some of them can be active. You can have multiple active versions of a BOM. You'll have one like default BOM that you can define per location, manufacturing location, but you can have other default BOMs located at other locations. And they have a status control on them, so that you could status that they're new, they're in engineering review, they're in design, and they have the ability to track versions. So I'd say the 2 systems are pretty much tied, because they both have a few features that are advantageous and a few features that are disadvantageous. The one thing I would give Business Central the big plus on is that mass change and upload BOMs by Excel. So Business Central has native ability to take BOMs and modify them, update them, upload new ones by Excel, whereas it's very hard to do that with GP. Routings in GP include labor and machine time as you're entering them. You can define both. You have the ability to link routing and BOM materials, you planning and pointer routings, you have operation codes. Basically, Business Central is kind of similar. It's a header with lines model. It's a little bit like the BOM, that the routing is defined. It's not item specific. You can have one routing and have 500 items use the same routing. You link your routing and your BOM's materials on a routing link code, which is very similar. There's no such thing as a pointer routing. To be honest with you, I did research this when I created the PowerPoint, but it was a while ago, and I can't remember what a pointer routing is. Operation codes are tied to the machine center. So you can have operation codes, but they are based on the machine center. Overall, it's a tie. I'd say one thing that Business Central kind of lacks a little bit, and I'll talk about this later, is the labor and machine time. You would create two work centers. You'd have a work center for a machine, or a machine center that's a person, and a machine center that's a machine, and you tie them together in a parallel routing, which is more complicated. Consumption data entry. This is where I'm going to point that out. You consume your materials with the manual order receipt, backflush or manual consumption. You tie the PO to the MO manually. You can do that. You could consume materials independently or with a receipt in consumption. You could forward flush with Business Central. It's not used that often, but you could have a picking operation and say it's forward flushed. And when they complete and mark that they've done 50 of that picking operation, then, or when they start the picking operation rather, it would just bring all the material in automatically. POs tie to the jobs for ETO through the jobs or the projects module. So it's it would be done differently, but it would have the same effect. Really friendly data entry process. So I'm going to give Business Central a star on the consumption of material, because I think the consumption of material in Business Central just seems to work a lot better. It's a lot friendlier. The capacity or output data entry, which is now recording my employee time and machine time, and backflushing and manual consumption. Business Central only records the machine time. Now you could set up a machine as an employee, but then you're putting two time entries in. One time entry for the machine. The machine ran for 8 hours. One time entry for the operator. The operator was there for 8 hours. You can backflush and do manual consumption, which you could do also. And there are some really good add-on ISV solutions for data collection that are just simply not available in GP that I've ever seen. I think there are, like Horizon and some others have some data collection, but they don't have anything that works with native GP manufacturing that I have seen. I am going to say, though, that GP's ability to record employee time and machine time on a single line and built design for that is actually really good and improves over Business Central out of the box. But once you add the ISV for shop floor collection for Business Central is going to be far superior. Okay, MRP. So GP uses a bucketed MRP, which is a traditional way of doing it, where you do it by define buckets of a particular size, let's say weekly, and then it's essentially every Monday of that week, it's going to do the MRP for whatever that week would require. Let's say if it's Monday. It supports a sales forecast model. It supports standards Apex planning in the bucketed Apex model. It's complex but powerful. It's a little bit hard for people to set up and use. Business Central uses bucketless, which means that if you have a 12-week horizon and you do a 2-week lot accumulation period, and the first time you're going to need a material is in 2 weeks on a Wednesday, it's going to book a Wednesday order for you. Versus if in 2 weeks you need it on a Monday, it'll be a Monday order. If in 2 weeks you need it on a Thursday, it'll be a Thursday order. So it's bucketless. It doesn't matter. It's just daily. Every day is looked at, and for that item going out that many days, it looks at it. It has a light version called the requisition worksheet and a full version called planning worksheet that includes MRP and MPS. Light, the requisition worksheet, just does purchase orders, but it's really actually very good and easy to use. It's also standards Apex planning, but in a bucketless model. It's complex but powerful. Business Central, though, beats GP because the Business Central modules are much easier to understand for customers. They have a lot more feature integration into the core of the system. It's a lot easier to use the requisition worksheet. Customers tend to use MRP much better than they do in GP, than my experience. Okay, some BC features that aren't in GP. Things BC does. So BC has this thing called a value entry. And value entries are something I was looking for in GP, but it doesn't do. And it has to do with allowing receipts against manufacturing orders, purchase orders, etc., to be recosted at all FIFO layers. So if I have a manufacturing order that I create in Business Central and I receive half of it, and then 2 weeks later I receive the other half of it, and then 2 weeks later I get my last PO against a contractor, I get my last labor entries and my material consumption, and then I finish it. It will go through every layer of those manufactured items and recost them all. It'll bring them all to the same amount. So if the first group came out at a certain amount and the second group came out at a different amount, because I'm doing actuals, and the third group came out at a different amount, It'll go through, it'll layer them all, create them all, and then it'll chase them through all the places they've been used. So if they were used in the next manufacturing order as materials, and the next manufacturing order, and then finally sold as finished goods, that'll roll all the way up and be corrected. Does not create variances. It just goes right into the inventory. It's very, very good. It's deeply ingrained in the system. It works throughout the system, and it is much, much better than what I've experienced in GP in the day. That may have been fixed, but I couldn't find any evidence that it was. There's a concept called a simulated production order. It's used to simulate what a production order would look like. Generally, the best use of it is probably for running a quote, basically taking and creating a fake production order for an item, changing the quantity on it, and running the analysis reports on it to try and do a quote for that product. There's no GP equivalent. There's a concept called the production family. This allows you to use a single routing, but to produce multiple co-products. It's out of the box. It's inherent in Business Central. There's no GP equivalent to it. And this is something that in automotive stamping, injection molding, etc., is very common, where you might be able to have an injection molding die, and it has 4 of one product, 4 left and 4 right. And so every time you hit it, you're going to produce 8 parts, but 4 of them are going to be different from the other 4, native to Business Central. GP features that aren't in Business Central. The quick MO. I miss the quick MO. It's a great GP feature. Lets you just create an MO, report it, auto backflush the labor, and close it and receive it in an inventory with basically one click. It would probably be somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,000 to create that in Business Central as a custom. It may be in some ISV today. I am going to be adding it as a Kanban in Sabre Limited's ISV solutions shortly. Quantity types. So the ability to say that I have inventory, it's in a bin, but it's defective. And I have other inventory and it's in a bin and it's being reworked. And I have other inventory and it's in a bin and it's good. That does not exist in Business Central. I would need a rework bin. I'd need a defective bin. I'd need a good quality, good bin, and I'd have to move the materials into there. There's a lot of value to it. You can also use something called variant codes to sort of do something equivalent, but the quantity type native in GP is actually a really good feature. So the quality assurance, there are a lot of ISV solutions that do the QC part of GP, which is mostly on incoming inspection from purchase. And there's various workarounds to do it, but as a general rule, this is a feature that GP has that, although not perfect, actually does create a nice add-on. The other one is engineering change. So in GP, there is actually pretty good engineering change module in the sense that it does what you need to do, which is define a process flow to say, I'm changing the part, stop making the design I have. Now you can turn on in BC, I'm changing this BOM, I want to put the part on hold for production while I'm changing the BOM and to get it approved. It's just a few manual steps, but the reworking of the existing product and defining it and setting it aside and being able to have a workflow for who approves that, and is it going to be used as is or reworked or thrown out and scrapped. That capability of the engineering change in Business Central is in some ISVs, but it's not in the standard Business Central module. So, I hope this video was helpful to you in going through what some of the advanced manufacturing features, or the comparison of the manufacturing features between Business Central and Great Plains are. And we're going to try and release new videos. We try and release new videos all the time at Sabre. And we have them weekly. So if you're interested in more videos on this GP to Business Central comparison, like we'd like to do one on warehousing, we'd like to do one on sales orders, we'd like to do one on a few other areas, go ahead and click the subscribe button, and as those get released, you'll be informed. And meanwhile, if you'd like to contact us to ask us any more questions, again, there's a link to my calendar in the bottom. If you've happened to watch all this way through the video, thank you so much. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help us get our videos out there. But if you'd like to contact us directly, here's our contact information, and my LinkedIn is shown there. So once again, everybody, thank you so much for watching. It's a pleasure, and have a great day.